into the third season for Mob Psycho 100, I was not expecting this to actually end up being the final season for the series entirely. I thought this was just going to be another season and then we were going to end up waiting for a season 4, but no, it turns out this ended up being the final season because the manga had already been concluded a long time ago. I'm presuming it did, and now it's finally done with the anime adaptation. It ended a couple of days ago on Wednesday. By the time you're watching this, maybe you won't actually end up be seeing this until after New Year's, depending on the time I get around to actually editing this. But yeah, going into it, I thought this is just going to be another season for Mob, and he's going to get into some weird shenanigans for the season, and some crazy stuff was going to happen. And regardless, some crazy stuff does end up happening in the season, but ultimately this was the final conclusion for Mob's character and his journey, and it's over. It's been concluded, and a lot of people were very excited about how the way that it was adapted, and some people were also very sad about it as well, because people have grown very attached to the characters and the universe that the manga who created the original manga series, they were very attached to what was created, and they liked what they were watching or what they were reading, and they were reading the manga. I didn't get into Mob Psycho 100 until after I finally watched the first 2 seasons, and season 2 had already been basically concluded, but I liked the premise of it, because the premise is so incredibly simple, like one usually does. He takes a very simple premise and then he spins it around to make it entirely different. And the premise for Mob Psycho 100 is that we have a high school kid who has psychic abilities and is super powerful, and his psychic abilities are sometimes linked to his emotions. Season 1 was mainly showing off the world and the characters who were going to be featured the most, which is going to be Mob, his brother, and a couple of other characters as well. Season 2 was showing off more of what they built upon in the first season, which was basically Mob is this super powerful psychic user, but instead of using his psychic abilities for his own selfish desires, like how Hanazawa was doing when we first saw him for the first time in the first season, where he basically used his psychic powers to defeat anybody who stood in his way and was basically the most popular kid in his class in his entire school. Meanwhile, we have Mob as a comparison. He's basically the exact opposite of what Hanazawa actually even was. He didn't have very many friends, he wasn't super popular, and no one really talked to him besides the people that he associated himself around with, which was the mind reading club that he was a part of. I forget what the club is actually called, and the body improvement club. And that's basically it. Mob was a super powerful psychic user, but he lived a normal and simple life. Season 2 took that premise of what season 1 was trying to show off and showed off this super powerful psychic group that was led by an even more incredibly powerful psychic user, and was trying to basically take control of the entire world through world domination and all that stuff. You know, the typical anime thing where they usually have like this super big baddie who's trying to take over the planet, and it's a stereotype, but one does something very unique with it, with the premise and what was built upon in the first season, where he essentially is trying to basically get the characters and the people who are a part of this evil association to basically realize that living a normal life isn't so bad. And they built upon that even more so, I would say, in the later half of the third season, where the big baddie ends up showing back up again, and he realizes after going to prison that the main thing that he wants to do is just to spend time with his family, because the bad guys from the show learned that living a simple life is the best thing that you can possibly have, and you don't always need to rely on your psychic powers for things. And that's what Mob has been trying to do this entire time, and he's been suppressing his emotions, because the first time someone showed him any kindness for his psychic powers was the girl that he had a massive crush on, Tsubomi, and one day she ended up stopped talking to him and hanging out with him, and from that day forward he started suppressing his psychic powers and his emotions. And because he stopped using either or, that's what caused both his emotions and his psychic powers to start linking up together. And the later half of season 3 basically shows off that he's been suppressing himself, and that it's been hurting him internally, and he's been harvesting it, and it's been building up, and finally one day when he gets into an accident, it took control, and he was basically starting to destroy everything around him. And it wasn't until Reigen, the only other person besides Tsubomi who treated him with any kindness and respect, to tell him that it's okay for him to be who he is. And that's kind of like the whole message behind the third season, that being who you are and using what makes you special is okay, because everyone is special in their own unique ways, and all you have to do is just accept who you truly are. And once you're able to do that, you're able to live life the best way that you can. And he even admits to Mom that he had been lying the whole time, that Reigen wasn't some powerful esper or anything. He didn't have any psychic abilities, and he couldn't see spirits or anything. He wasn't special at all. And he was finally able to accept that part of himself, and that was what led him to finally accepting that he needed to tell Mob that. And once Mob heard that, he was finally able to accept his psychic powers and his real feelings and how he felt at all times, and he became the truest version of himself. And even after he was rejected by Tsubomi, he was able to show off actual genuine emotion without having his psychic powers go erupt. And although he felt sad about it, it didn't mean it was the end of the world either, and he was perfectly okay and content with that. Their whole relationship actually ends up ending off with them staying in contact and having more conversations with one another. They're not dating, but they're a lot more closer than they used to be in comparison to the first season, where they didn't even really notice or see each other in any way whatsoever. Season 3 was basically just like the culmination of taking everything that was built upon in the first 2 seasons and just coming up with some sort of conclusion for it. Like in the beginning first quarter of the season, we have Dimple trying to continue on with what he was trying to do for the past like 2 seasons, since season 1, where he was trying to create and cultivate a cult and basically just use their like life force or their energy to be able to make himself ultra super powerful. And the way that he was able to do that in season 3 is that he used the giant broccoli tree was created in the end of the second season to be able to take control of everybody's minds and basically take on and take in the energy of the surrounding area that was around the broccoli tree. And him and Mob confront one another, and Mob basically, towards the end of the fight, decides that fighting him isn't going to be able to solve anything. So he instead talks with him like an actual person, even though Dimple is a spirit, and he makes him realize that Dimple was just a very lonely person, because he's a spirit and not many people can see him, but there are a few select amount of people who can see him, and they treat him like he's one of their comrades and one of their friends. And that's really all Dimple wanted from the beginning, is that he just wanted more people to be attached to without having to take full control over them. And by the end of the series, towards the final quarter of the season, he actually is able to help Reigen finally get close to Mob to finally be able to tell him what he wanted to tell him, and Dimple helped out, and that was cool. In the middle, in between of the first quarter and the last quarter, they had the second one where they basically continue on further with continuing to wrap up things that they were building on in the like first 2 seasons, I would say. And it's basically like the Mind Reader Club. I forget again what it's called, but they find out that one of the guys who started the club was actually able to read minds. And so with the help of his assistants and his powers, they go and they meet up with aliens. And that's kind of it. I guess one wanted to have a really weird and wacky sort of like mini arc before the shit started to get really crazy. But that's basically what ended up happening in season 3. That's pretty much all I really have to say about like them meeting aliens, and that's kind of it. They just meet aliens. One of their group ends up getting like taken by accident to their home planet, and he does like some really weird stuff there. But that's kind of it. I don't really have much else to say about it. But yeah, they just have a couple other small moments that in season 3 as well that I also really enjoyed. One of the moments that I ended up really enjoying as well is like probably the biggest one, and that people also pointed out online, and it was the comparison scenes from the first time we see Reigen have a birthday. He sits in a room by himself where not even he remembered it was his birthday. But in comparison to the second time we see him have a birthday, which is at the end of the last episode, all of his friends that he's made along the way and the people that he trusts the most, and even Mob is there as well, of course. They all celebrate his life and him being alive and him being around and him being their friend. And that was really nice to see. Yeah, that's all I really kind of have to say about the third season. It just finally put a conclusion upon everything that was being built up for basically every single character that was ever shown off in this entire show. And it ends off with Mob laughing at the camera, and it's the first time we actually ever see him have a genuine, like, heartful laugh, and he had never done that before, and he does that for the very, very last shot of the series, and Mob Psycho 100 officially finally concludes. And I really enjoyed this series. I wasn't expecting what was going to happen once getting into it. Wasn't expecting anything. I didn't know what was going to happen. Didn't even really know what it was about. But ultimately, there are a couple of life lessons that you learn from watching Mob Psycho 100 that I think everybody can use every now and then. You know, the whole message behind living a normal life instead of, trying to aim for the skies and aim for the stars and trying to make it big. Sometimes you don't really necessarily need to do that. Sometimes doing the simplest things is also enjoyable. And being the truest form of yourself, being the truest version of yourself, that's also something that you should strive to do as well. And yeah, that's all I really have to say about Mob Psycho 100. It finally ended. I wasn't expecting it to end, but it did, and I had a lot of fun. And, you know, it sucks that it's, you know, we're not going to see anything more, but who knows what One has in store for us in terms of his future series, whether or not it would be something new or he's continuing stuff with One Punch Man, which he's still doing with the manga. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about Mob Psycho 100. It was a fun journey. It sucks that it ended, but at least it knew when it wanted to decide to end, unlike some other series. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like. And if you want to see more, please be sure to subscribe. I'll see you guys next one. Have a fantastic day. I'm out. Peace.